Welcome to this interview in the summit. I'm going to be speaking with Bonnitta Roy, who is an award-winning author, a philosopher, and facilitator of collective insight practice. And in this conversation, we're going to talk about collective insight practice. What is it to bring together a group of people in order to surface insights and creative discoveries that wouldn't have otherwise surfaced with the individuals? Bonnitta will talk about, what kind of context do we need to set as a facilitator. She'll talk about the kind of modes of being and perceiving that we want to invite participants into. And Bonnitta will also talk a bit about how collective insight practice is different from other types of emerging we-space practices in the world today. So with that being said, here is Bonnitta Roy. What is in collective insight practice? And let's explore what you're doing with that, and we can kind of take it from there.
Okay, so what I've learned about what is collective insight practice, is, first of all, there's three pillars of it. There's the individual autonomy and sovereignty. When you do collective insight practice, you're expected to show up and speak from your perspective, not like some social object or some, if you go to a conventional church, you're supposed to adopt those words and phrases. But in insight practice, you're asked today to speak your perspective, whether it's a minority position or not. That's what you're asked to do. So that's the individual level. Then there's the collective level, and that is, how can the collective hold me, and how do we hold each other, and all the internal dynamics that are going on. And a lot of people do a lot of work called we-space practice, and they're working with those two dimensions, the kind of toggle between the individual and the collective.
Yeah.
The pressure to belong and the need to be unique and this and that. So I find those are interesting experiments, but they don't actually produce insight, because the third pillar of collective insight practice is action in the world. You have to let the world in. The practice has to be grounded in the world, because the world is the natural order of things. So this is why these practices work in organizations better than they work in some of these spiritual communities, because the spiritual communities don't have a task.
Right.
The world is not invited in. Now, the spiritual community could do this around why is our garden not working, or why, a task. So the world grounds the toggling between the individual and the community. And we know this, for example, Jaworski wrote about a hurricane running through the town. And he's and he goes out in the street, and everybody's all of a sudden, everybody's coherent action. Well, that's because the hurricane ground, the action, the immediacy and the clarity of the action in the world will ground and support and catalyze the individual collective. So many of these circles are missing that piece, and I think that's why it got so popular. And most people have moved to doing this work in organizations.
Yeah, I mean, just to say something about that was one of my frustrations a little bit with practice like circling, which actually I have to fully respect it, as well, that it did totally transform me. It was a very powerful practice of practicing that kind of autonomy, sovereignty, and in the collective, and some quite remarkable things happened in those spaces. And there was always that gnawing kind of sense for me of yeah, but we're doing it all in these collective circle, in these bubbles. And I absolutely see how it trains me to be out in the world and bring this kind of consciousness with others, which is transformational. But there was a sense of if this is what we say it to be, world changing kind of technology, something's not quite jiving there. And so I appreciate what you're saying. Like I say, I really want to bow down to circling as a practice that's brought me so much. But
it builds skills. I mean, so the point is, all these many different technologies do different things. The problem becomes what they claim they're doing versus what they're doing. So circling builds this kind of circling that you're describing builds a very powerful skill. How do I be in social space? Like bodies in space already is a lot. Like there's a lot going on just when you put bodies in space. This is true for animals of all sorts. So there's a lot going on now. How the skill you're building is, how do I speak my truth when there's bodies in space, maybe staring at me? This is a skill, and then notice the obstructions and the cycles and the rhythms of the anxiety or the anger and this or that. So that's building a very valuable skill for collective insight practice. The problem is they claim there's a higher goal at the end of it. In a lot of cases, it's either spiritualized or psychologized. And the problem with this is, if you understand the psyche and the collective psyche, is that, this is true for individual trauma work if you're a coach too, is the psyche will make more structures. It can make infinite number of structures. So there's never, now you're going to have like the projection or the rejection or the introjection or whatever, and the psyche will make them as fast as you can process them, because that's what the psyche does. If you discover that, that's an insight. But so there's, it's like software coding. You have to know what the definition of done is, right? When's the product done? Because in coding, you could go on forever creating features, right? The psyche is like that.
Right. And I've been in those, like 7 hours in, and you're like, holy crap, like
it's why you can't process masculine and feminine dynamics through dialogue alone. Mm-hmm. It's like, get a bunch of people together and climb a mountain. There's a lot more resolved quicker when you put that to an action in the world, and people will agree with that. People who have done work in the real world.
So let's what's the key to collective insight practice? We've got these three: the individual, the collective, and the world, action in the world. So I'm if I'm getting this right, like what we're saying is that, or is what you're saying, that you can bring a group of people together in a way where you create some kind of coherence, and we have to say, what does that word mean, in a way that then produces some kind of goodness, like there's an outcome, an insight, or a project, or something that furthers us and what we care about.
Yeah. So there are several keys or skills, I would say, and I'm just going to highlight the ones that are maybe unique to collective insight practice. So I'll start with things that are fundamental and probably well known by your audience. One is, as Tom Chi says, if you want to solve a problem, don't invite a bunch of experts, because they knew how to solve it. It would all be solved. So there's a way in which, when you come to collective insight practice, you have your expert knowledge, but you're kind of throwing it there so you're over it. You're kind of saying, this is what I know, and I'm offering it because it's not that. So you're delineating what the problem isn't with your expertise. And so you don't want to not say it, because in that sharing, some people learn something sometimes, but it's offered because you say, these are all the things it's not. Because if it was that, then, we wouldn't be here. So that's one way of getting that information. Experts, you have the energy to share. There may be some ways that people see into you and get some insight, but you offer it up and you allow it there, because this is what we're saying, it's not this, okay? Then that's terrain traveled. It's not in those places. There may be bits that we like there, but it's not that. So that's one thing. The second thing is, you need to move from what's called, and there's a lot of neuroscience around this, I won't get into it, but you need to move from egocentric processing which is called reflection or you get kind of self-reflection, to allocentric processing, which is called reflexivity. And what do I mean by that? In these practices, when people are giving a prompt, they tend to go in energetically. They go into their felt sense. And how can I say this? So in collective insight practice, that's not the place to go. You're already conceptualizing your inner experience. You probably are strategizing thoughts. You're becoming self-conscious. You're building recursive loops of witnessing. You're not in the presence of the collective. So energetically, the facilitator has to watch for this. I mean, I'll tease people because it always starts like this. And I'm like, I know how you're like in there. And you're like, I want to say this, And you're strategizing. You have a gatekeeper. I don't want to say that. Like, this is really different. So I call it reverse Bohmian dialogue. You want to try to say whatever arises, put it up there until the system is exhausted. So this move is not... This is not the move that we want in collective insight practice. We want the energy to come from the lived experience through the perceptual system and wait for the experience to serve up an image or an idea or some crazy thought that comes out of nowhere. You don't know if it has a function. Usually it has a function. So we teach this allocentric mode.
What does that mean? Like, the allocentric mode, what is that like?
Okay, so those are terms from neuroscience. They're actually discrete pathways, but it means that the energy is coming up it has to do also with the way the energy body is described in like Dzogchen. But the energy comes from the intentional system. You're primed. You're in a mood. Maybe you have a lot of energy. Maybe you actually have anger. I mean, energy comes up like this. And you don't want to think about it. What you do is you use your perceptual system to track, like the energy system is feeling the whole mood. And then you use your eyes wide open. You let them wander. So the energy is coming up through your intentional system to your attentional system. And you may not even know. You'll look at, like I'm looking at these two violins on my wall. And now, for some reason, I'm looking at an ant on the floor. It's not trivial where your eyes go and where your attention pauses. Your body is looking to satisfy a problem that you're processing at a deep subthreshold level subthreshold to consciousness. So you use this, the intentional and attentional system. Sometimes you might catch someone's face and laugh. You don't know why. You're working with the basic fundamental nature of the intelligence of the body. And then something might happen. You're like, I don't know why I'm thinking this. Or you might say, wow, I never noticed that. Look at that little ant. It looks like he's struggling. And you just say it. And it may have energy. It may not have energy. I call it still hunting, because it's basically the mode. I teach it as a skill of you're the hunter in the grasslands. You go out early in the morning and you sit, and you just hunt by. You see the gazelles, and this all of a sudden a gazelle comes too close, and then you grab it, right? So something's offered up to you, and this is the way. The body will always offer up ideas or images or whatever, but you're in your body sensing the whole, looking, you're in the world, and then something will come up, a thought. And that's what you add to the stew.
It sounds like a complete shift in self-orientation, where almost like meditative, where you're in a receptive state. You're not in that kind of self-reflective state, filtering and imagining, but actually you've invited people into this very receptive state, embodied, where there's full permission to kind of just name what's emerging in their phenomenological experience.
Mm-hmm. And if you can't do that, if you go in reflexive, then you say, wow, I just noticed a shift in, so you make that part of the landscape. This is why, if you sit with indigenous leaders, that's what they're doing. They don't say much. They sit, then they say something, and it's really profound, right? Because they're letting their body process the field of awareness, you could say, or the world. When you do insight practice like this, sometimes it's almost always the case. Very unusual things have happened. Wild birds will come into the space and sit. And then you don't like, oh, that's a metaphor for, you don't jump on that. You don't jump on that as a metaphor. You feel that shifted the energy in us somehow. All these like little resonances. This is why you also need the world. They come in. And if something comes up, you share it. There's a point at which if you're doing mature version, we agree, like if something comes up, you share it. And when people first start, they're like, oh my God, they get really nervous because all along they've been thinking horrible things about each other. But when you sit down and you agree, as soon as a thought comes up, you're going to share it. That recursive thought subsides and nothing comes up because you're so vigilant. And it's this vigilance that waits for something to arise. And it always does, because that's the nature of the body. The body will serve up images and ideas.
I'm really touched by this. Like I get just this sense of also the Goethean kind of way of seeing, or the like imagine, it's like we're actually engaging a whole different way of being in reality, in a sense, and allowing the whole reality to be received and its deeper layers to be kind of received without that interpretation too quickly. Like, and there's a kind of energetic quality to it too. It's like this is the way I'm interpreting it, but it's like like I feel touched by what you're sharing, and I'm curious what you'd say to that, and also just like what's the outcome, or like what's the role of the facilitator? Is there a journey to this process? Like, in the beginning, people are coming in and they're given this frame that allows them to open in this way, and then then what happens then? So it's a lot of things in one, but I'll just see where you take it.
Yeah, so the facilitator, and everybody can do this, but the facilitator's role is to make sure that people are, try to make sure the energy is allocentric. Now, it turns out this is very exhausting for people to do. You have to maintain incredible clarity and awareness, and the nervous system it's like a muscle you have to build. It's kind of like, have you ever done heart math?
No, I haven't tried it, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a paradox, because when you're in resonance, you feel very calm and stuff. But keeping yourself in that state of resonance requires quite a bit of effort when you first start, because your body is conditioned to take energy and loop it. So one of the things as a facilitator is you're trying to make it easier, support the allocentric modes. You can work with provocative objects. Humor is also important. You want to, if you understand different phases that the group goes in, then you're not nervous when it looks like it's going backwards. It's like a necessarily recharge. Also, the facilitator has to realize these are nonlinear dynamics, so we don't know what in the right direction is. Right. So quite often on the second day, you think, "Oh my God," and you are in despair. But if you have this idea of, I don't know, it may be in the right direction and maybe in the wrong direction, it's really directionalist. And the reason why that's important for the facilitator, because no matter how skillful this facilitator is, they hold more power. There's asymmetric power because everybody knows. So if you're even your body reaction changes because you think something's in the right direction or not, you'll skew the energetic dynamics. So to be mindful of that is very powerful, because subtly people are looking to you, like we used to look to teachers, we're so conditioned to see if it's in the right direction or not. The facilitator's role is to amplify those things that seem special. Like a lot of times in collective insight practice, someone will say something and then there's a there's a gift in it, but it seems ordinary to them. This happened, remember earlier I said we had collective insight practice and we came up with this phrase, something truly seen is truly loved. And somebody just said truly seen. It was a phrase that came up. But then earlier someone was talking about, does the fox love the rabbit? And somehow those two came together at this. And so when he said truly seen, somebody else immediately started talking about something else. And as a facilitator, I was like, no, wait a second. This is, I mean, the way he said it, he didn't explain it away. This was something that had a lot of insight into it. It was like in his body.
Because, yeah. You just made that movement, like, in the body. Like, does it come with a kind of imbued sense of significance, or, like, is there a felt quality? I guess what I'm trying to say to it.
Yeah, I mean, it was for him, but for some reason he was willing to just let it go. So I directed back. No, let's. Or sometimes people will say things, and I'll say. And then the conversation will just go on. I'll say, wait, what did you just say? And I say it exactly the way you just said it. And then they'll say it again. They're like, oh my God. They don't realize they had a great insight, because we get conversational. We don't pay attention and the insights do come. So one of the roles of the facilitators is to amplify what seems to be out of the ordinary or a little bit unprecedented, or has a little is interesting, and when the group doesn't notice or the person doesn't notice, to reflect that back into the space is important.
And I'm wondering whether there starts to be a kind of like emergent coherence around, we talked about the action in the world. Perhaps a group comes in. I want to ask you in a moment as well, like if you work with companies or that they bring in problems that need solving. But I'm wondering whether there's a kind of collective coherence that starts to emerge. Like where I've been in these spaces where you can feel it, something shifts, and then everybody's kind of tuned in, and like you said about those indigenous. It's like nobody. The conversation drops a lot, and when words are spoken, they seem to be like perhaps they're like from understanding and connection rather than the other category you defined. But it's like, and then there's like, it's feeding in. One person says something, and then that sparks something for someone else. Like, does it go like that, or because in some way it could also sound quite random. Yeah, like maybe you don't want that. Maybe you want to allow for like a kind of chaos, or somebody says one thing, it's random, and it seems random, someone says something else. And does that make sense? I'm kind of like pointing at the dynamics really within the group. And
so there's two things. So when I was doing my experiments, we were just doing it more like for circling, like what is insight practice, what is collective practice, the subject of the inquiry was the practice of the inquiry. So it was kind of recursive that way. And we went through some really rough periods. There were times when I thought, literally, I remember saying, this is literally going to kill me. But we kept on doing them, and self-selected a little bit. There was probably 60% of the people were 20%, 40% were there all the time, 60% were there most of the time, 20% were there one or two times over the 3 years. And then at the end, we did a lot of very intense work. And at the end, we did a collective insight practice, and it was one of these things where there'd be silence. All of a sudden, everyone would throw in their hand like this and go, ah, or holy fuck. It's like the insight, there was an insight that would happen, like simultaneously, people were getting a charge. Unfortunately, when you all do that at once, then you all kind of lose it because you shock each other. But we entered these very highly generative metaphysical spaces. I mean, the things, some person was like, I don't know, I see this, but it's a line. And then we went to bed and I know what the line is. And then he's like, yeah. And so basically you're dreaming together, you're mashing up paradigms and stuff. And you start to get the space of highly metaphysical insights in the nature of time and space and origin, and I started to realize that this is how the great metaphysical traditions probably were generated from insight practice. Now the thing is, these are highly virtual spaces. They're things that live more in the mind, and they don't have a lot of attributes in the world. So on that last weekend, we sat out on the grass, we drank champagne, and we said we weren't going to do another one because we realized this could go on forever, highly metaphysical space. But we were going to put this to action in the world, and people all went out and started companies. I started App AI, and my friends started consulting, and another friend's working on local currency in the Philippines. We all took that to heart. The purpose of this being this liberated in your imagination is to go back into the world. So so that answers one thing, and we'll talk about what's the practical outcome maybe of this. But the other thing is, there's this great movie, I think it's called Fine Lines, and it's about 3 women who rowed a rowboat around the world. And their ritual was 2 hours, 4 women. So there was 2 rowers all the time and 2 people who were sleeping or eating all the time. So they row for 2 hours, you eat and sleep for 2 hours. You row for 2 hours, you eat and sleep for 2 hours. And they get a month behind in the middle of they get a month behind, and that brings them into tropical storm. So they had to go away, a month longer than they were supposed to. It's a great movie because what they do is fascinating. 3 of them are the same 3 people all the way across, but at the different legs, 2 different legs, they bring on a new person. And the people they bring on have never rowed before. And I'm thinking, what kind of craziness is that? But it changes the dynamic because they're not bored with rowing anymore, and they start becoming teachers, and the new person has this new kind of life to add to the boredom, and they suffer through it. And there's a point at which one of the ones who stayed the whole time, who's like the anchor, she gets saved by one of the new people. I mean, the film should be shown in every team, in every organization, because teams don't want change. They don't want new people because it's disruptive unless you have the right attitude. It was a brilliant design of this. Brilliant. this one woman, she's like on the last leg. She's like not even in good shape. And she's like, I don't know why they liked me. I don't know why they picked me. They saw something in her, you know? And even me, I'm like, really? Like, really? So in collective insight practices like that, you can start to get into a groove. And then when the new person comes, there's more groan zone. There's more like energy that you think you've been through, done that. And you can find your own intolerance for the novelty again, because what's novel is, what seems novel is no longer novel to you. So that's an important thing to understand. The space is not sacred and precious that way. And it's very hard to understand that about insight practice.
Well, and imagine people could get a bit elitist about, oh, yeah, we can get into that allocentric state very easily, and then someone comes along who can't,
exactly.
But actually, that's a good thing.
And you have private language because you had these little experiences that, like, someone, like I remember someone going, hollow. They discovered their mind is hollow. So the word hollow is richly embedded in this one group. And when new people come in and they don't share this private language, I think it's the way religion started. You come in and you hear these words, but you haven't had those experiences, but you replicate them, you ape them, and spirituality becomes religion, right? Just constant replication of private language that nobody knows what it means anymore. Right. So those are some of the traps.
And you said, like, it sounds like you went through this 3-year journey to kind of test out what is collective insight practice by exploring that. And have you then been applying this in other spaces, like, for example, in businesses that need to innovate in certain ways or solve problems or challenges, or team, any kind of group that wants to solve a challenge, to then apply this way of working where they've come up with something unexpected or novel as a solution?
Yeah, so I would say I apply some of the skills, and I will teach the skills under different types of names depending upon, but only recently I haven't done anything actually called collective insight practice until recently. I did a month of 3 weekly sessions for 11 groups online. Everybody wanted to do things on Zoom, and I taught some of these skills we're talking about. But I haven't done an actual collective insight full blown. It's 2.5 days since those early days, and part of it is because I'm waiting. I don't know. This may be just an argument. I don't know, but usually I don't call them. They get called. And then I host them. Toward the end, I was doing a few after that retreat, but what was happening is they weren't real collective insight practice. They were me teaching people how to do collective insight practice. So I haven't really been in a circle that does collective insight practice. And only recently, I've been looking at different things that people do, and some of these tendencies we talk about in these other spaces, that's mostly what people are doing. And I don't really like doing that kind of work. And people who would be interested in my work, that's not what I do. So it's kind of like I'm just kind of waiting for people who have a really good question to see if they want to engage in some of this practice. Now, having said that, I'm beginning to be skeptical about the form of the practice itself. I think, in other words, the form of the practice being heavily resource intensive, everybody in a room for 3 days and you crunch through this thing. I think, like, I'm doing a weekly session that's an hour every week on the Stoa. And it's kind of like these little kind of it's more like apps and less program. Like collective insight practice is a big program.
Mm.
And the world we live in today is moving away from that. And so now I'm doing things that are more like apps that give you little skills that are like collective insight. It's a completely different approach. And I think when I feel into it, it's kind of like that whole era of this intense crunching of something in a single space. I think that's probably obsolete now, if I really think about it. So the question is then, how do you build these skills in all these little interventions? And so the capacity is built over time. And for me, that's much more modern and timely in the world we live in.
It seems like that's a general movement, like if you look at Keegan's deliberately developmental organizations, it's like
Exactly.
we actually need to, we can't compartmentalize these practices or learning in this way. We need to bring it inside the organization day to day, moment to moment. And that's my sense of it too, is that it's all becoming part of this stream. And actually, therefore, will become more deeply transformational.
And there's something about these practices that's the body responds to them in a certain way. The body, when your body goes somewhere and sits in insight practice, and then you learn something. This is why transferable training is very hard. Then you go to your normal routine. The body makes a strong cut between this context and that context. And it's very hard to get the skills to translate. This is also backed by neuroscience. And so, so pulling the plug on that, if you can pull it off and understand some of the skills in insight practice and just bring them into every day under whatever labels or names or common language or grammar that you have in that space, I think overall you make little ripples that in the end become a bigger transformation.
I just hear throughout our conversation, if there was to be a shift where we could have these kinds of spaces where people were invited into a different mode of being together, that then that could, if that proliferates, and I'm thinking of parliaments or politicians and the way they come together and begin to, I think it's a great example of like the social media thing you talked about. Well, if I look at especially US politics, it seems to be a great example of that polarized kind of infighting and people coming together around understanding and communication in a way that would allow insight to occur. Like that could be a general trend that could be incredibly transformative.
Yeah, and if you look at the larger cultural movement, in some sense, we're always immersed in collective insight practice as a species. And now, as your facilitator of the human race, you don't know what's in the right direction, right? So at the same scale, you can have that same kind of orientation. How do I move in this space that's evolving as humans? These processes are always there anyways. And at the larger level, how do I participate? And knowing that we don't know what's in the right direction.
Well, this has been a rich conversation, and I just wondered, as we come to a close, if maybe you could then offer people, make an invitation to people that might be, supportive of what you just shared there. How might we be in the world, or what practice might we take on that would be generative in these times?
I'm just going to share something that's in an article I'm writing that has captivated my imagination. It came to me like the way insight comes. And, I work with a group of people. There's this popular phrase that that Zach Stein has made it popular again, a time between worlds. We're in a time between worlds. And there's something interesting in the way we are humans right now. Like, we have this metaphor of the butterfly transitioning, and this comes into this time also. But I had like a reframe of that whole metaphor that came to me as an insight recently, and that is, as humans, this is how we actually relate to the butterfly and the chrysalis. So as caterpillars, humans just want to eat more, grow bigger, grow more legs, and devour everything, right? That's the trajectory. That's how we look at time and change and progress. And then when we become butterflies, we just want to fly farther, faster, lay more eggs, right? Nobody ever invites the chrysalis, and we hardly welcome it. So when we think of a time in between worlds, there's a sense in which we don't like it. What is it to invite the chrysalis and to welcome it? And the interesting thing I learned in looking up some biology, because I was kind of interested, why is this metaphor captivated me? Because I didn't know what was the difference between pupa, chrysalis, and cocoon. So I looked it up. And pupa is the stage. So many different insects go through this pupa stage. And moths, when they go into a pupa stage, they build a cocoon, which is like they wrap silk around themselves. Mm-hmm. They build something around themselves for safety. But what I didn't know is that for the caterpillar, the chrysalis grows from inside their skin and then throws it off. It's complete chaos. It's complete, disorganization from the inside. And that became a very powerful metaphor for me about what it feels like to be living in the time we do.
It fits for me too. I appreciate that as a frame, because what it does for me is it kind of normalizes it a bit, so that then I can be like, okay, well, because I've been fighting it, but it's like every move I make to try to like control or find ground is like failing. Yeah. Now my life, is going great in a lot of ways, but on this kind of like fundamental core existential level, it's like I can't quite find that. I'm like, fuck, where is it? Like it's gone. Or it's like, oh, it's and so the metaphor there, I think it invites me into like, well, I just let go a bit, and love one another in the process, being conversations like this, and at some point perhaps the butterfly will emerge. Perhaps this is it. This is the the new normal. So yeah, thanks, Bonnie.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.